Welcome to the Mind Rebel podcast. This is our Legacy Lived series, where we explore how legacy is shaped in real time through everyday choices, relationships, and the way people show up in their homes, their work, and the communities that they serve. This series is an invitation to reflect on how legacy is formed, not someday, but now. So before I introduce our guest today, I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by legacy in this space. So at the MRA, legacy is not about accomplishments or titles or impact measured from the outside. And it's also not something that only arrives at the end of a chapter or a career or even a life. So legacy is the quiet, relational imprint of a human who has done deep inner work on themselves. So it's how someone moves through the world, how someone loves and leads and serves, and how their own inner alignment creates these ripples simply by being who they are. This really is our why at the Mind Rebel Academy. We're not just a coaching school. We're here to develop grounded, emotionally intelligent humans who know how to lead themselves well. Coach training, as we teach it, is fundamentally about inner leadership. So it's this practice of learning how to relate to your own self, your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, your patterns with this sense of steadiness and care for yourself so that you can do that for others. And these skills don't stay just inside of a coaching session. They shape how you parent. They shape how you partner, how you lead, how you navigate conflict, how you communicate with any human. It's really how you show up for the people that you love, lead, and serve. When the way we relate to ourselves changes, the way we show up everywhere else changes too. So legacy isn't something that you build someday in the future. It's something that you're already living through. It's living through you, shaping rooms, shaping relationships, families, teams, communities in ways that are often unseen and unnamed. So this series, this Legacy Lived series, exists to honor how this kind of inner leadership reshapes the way a person lives and relates over time. So today I am joined by Kate Baldwin. Kate is an alum of the MRA, a beloved alum of the MRA, and truly a living, breathing example of what becomes possible when someone does this courageous work of knowing themselves and leading from that place. Kate, I am so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we dive in, I just want to check in. How are you arriving into this conversation today?
Excited, a little bit nervous, but I love that description you just gave of legacy. I've always thought of it as something at the end of one's life looking back, right? What you've left behind. But I love that description of it being what you do every day.
What does that evoke inside of you?
Hope. That's what came up. Hope. I don't know. Hope, as we'll probably get into, but I do try to now live my life far more in the present and forward facing, than I used to. And it sounds such a hopeful thing to think that you can live and breathe and have ripple effects of your legacy for years and decades of your life. Like, what a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. Kate, you have this humbleness about you that I admire and love. And the way that you do move through your life and the spaces that you touch and the people that you touch, you do create these very quiet ripples that are very impactful and powerful. And again, this is one of the reasons I really wanted to have a conversation with you about this, because when we think about impact and we think about legacy, we often think about these grand, big things or these grand accomplishments or these grand levels of impact. And what I really want to talk about here is that legacy is so much more than that. It's in the way we live our lives today. It's in the smallest conversations we have with our children. It's in the way we relate to our partners. It's in the way we show up for the people we serve at work It's in these really small, subtle, quiet ways. It's the way people feel our energy, even without us saying anything. I find that it's those qualities that often go uncelebrated or unseen because they are quiet, they are soft, they're not visible, but they're so felt. And to me, that is the greatest, expression or definition of legacy I can possibly think of.
It's beautiful. It makes me think it's so much truer to who I actually am to be more quiet, measured with my words and lead that way than the way I used to force myself to try to be, more in line with the, making the noise, speaking louder, accomplishing more. And, what I thought I was supposed to be doing for many years was that loud achievement and creation of legacy that way, which didn't work because it's not actually true to who I am.
Yeah. So, Kate, tell us a little bit about that old version of you, that world you came from.
The way I describe my old life now, looking back, it is like many people are. I was caught up on that path of accomplishment and path of achievement. I did well at school. So I sort of, followed the next step that was sort of expected of me. I was praised for getting good marks and, all of those external rewards, that you get when you're succeeding. So I followed that path into, university and then into medical school. Not really because there was any, I wasn't someone who had dreamt of being a doctor since I was a little girl, nothing like that. It was just sort of, I got good marks in science. So, you should do something with that. And to be honest, it was easy to look, in terms of, okay, what's the next goal? What's the next thing I can do? What's, the next best, well, what I thought was the next best step back then was to just do what I could. I might as well apply. So then you get in, well, I might as well go, right? And so I ended up on this path and into medical school and pediatrics residency and became a pediatrician. And, a lot of that was wonderful. A lot of that was really good. But it was only at the other end of that, so, 12 years of university kind of later, come out into what is, supposed to be my dream job that I, worked this hard to get and sort of spit out on the other side and realizing like, whoa, like, how did I get here? And it was at that point that I think maybe it was the first time that I'd ever had a chance, even little moments to sort of think about, is this right for me? What do I really want to be doing? They'd be little glimmers that I now can look back on and realize, okay, that was my authentic self. That was my intuition, whatever I want to call it, right? And there were little voices that came up that's like, so this is it? Or is this really where you want to be? And of course, back then, I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. By that point, I'd had, my son before I graduated, before I finished residency, and then my daughter a couple of years into practice, working in a hospital environment. So I didn't have a lot of time. So that voice would come up. I didn't have time for that, quite honestly. So I would just push it down, work harder, right? That must be the answer. That's what I've done, my whole life. I'll just work harder. This is success. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm supposed to want to do. Anyway. So I kept doing it. But that voice or that, I don't even know if it was a voice, but like that feeling, there was just this sense that just, every now and then in a slow moment, that little sense would come back up of like, nope, this is not for you, which was terrifying, to be quite honest.
I couldn't imagine after all that schooling and all that education.
Yeah. Well, right. And like also part of that was, okay, so like wonderful. Even if I realized that, no one stops being a doctor. Like that's what I thought at the time. Like no one listens to that, right? So even if that's true, it's not like I can change it. I'm too far down this path, right? But as, we've talked about it in the MRA and, if you keep ignoring that, that voice gets louder, right? Once you tune into it anyway, it's like I started hearing it, push it down. So then I would hear it the next time a little bit more forcefully. Went on for years, right? Really. But then I started to get louder signals. And so for me, that came in the form of, physical symptoms starting up, right? That didn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, I chalked it all up to stress because certainly I was living a, kind of high stress, high speed life at that time. But I started getting weird things from age. I was in my early 30s and I, had headaches all the time. I wasn't sleeping well, started to feel nauseous every day when I was, driving into the hospital. But I had a solution for that too. I, just started bringing a Ziploc bag with me everywhere I went in case I needed to throw up. Because at the time,
Wow, Kate.
that's like the Band-Aid, right? Like I'll fix that problem. If I feel nauseous, well, then I'll make sure that I'm ready in case something happens there, right? Then I got to the next step where I started to have those little thoughts of like, well, what if I got got into a minor car accident? Or what if I got a minor illness, but serious enough that I need a little bit of time off, right? So
Wow.
luckily, those kinds of thoughts got my attention because I was like,
Yeah.
okay, like,
If
what
I'm
is this,
fantasizing
right? Right?
about a
Because,
minor car accident to
right? Yes. And luckily, I'm very fortunate it didn't get any more serious for me.
right.
It was really about just wanting a break. It was my body, screaming for a
Screaming.
break, screaming. And it took screaming, right? So now looking back, I see that I was on the path to burnout for years before it got to the screaming, right? So it didn't have to get that far. So at that point, because this is, of course, pre-introspection and self-reflection that comes, down the road. But at that time, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm just not cut out for the hospital, the academic, pediatric environment, So of course, I was like, something's wrong with me. So I will remove myself
Mm.
from this environment and all the shame that goes along with that for saying that I can't cut it in this environment. And that's what it felt like there. So I moved from the hospital to a community practice that I set up. And actually, for the next number of years, things felt better, right? Now, looking back, I think it's because I had more autonomy, which is one of my core values. I had a little bit more control over my time. But most of me didn't change yet at that point. So most of me, I just kind of picked up the same woman and put her in a different location, right?
So the circumstances changed, but the human,
it was still there, still trying to live up to.
Live up to what?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I still try to answer that. And I think it's not that I didn't love my job, because I did love many aspects of my job. But I think that now looking back, what was required of me to fulfill what I thought was expected of me, at least in that role, because I'm still not sure how much of it is internal versus external expectations, right? I know I had some internal expectations that were not probably realistic, right? But for the job I was doing, I essentially had to put on a mask. I had to put on, or I thought I had to put on a mask in order to be in that environment, even in, the more individualized practice that I set up for myself. So now I think there was a disconnect. I think that I was on this path that was never truly right for me. Or I don't know. I still reflect on it and sort of peel layers, I think, even years later. Because this is like, over 10 years ago that we're talking about now that I left the hospital setting. So I can still think of it in many different ways. But I think ultimately I was asking myself to be someone that I wasn't.
The mask, in the MRA, we talk about the false selves, the guard who protects or the rebel mind who's scared. Or can you talk to us a little bit more about the mask that you were having to put on every day at work versus the real Kate? Maybe just help us understand that disconnect.
Yeah. So, and I'm not here to bash medicine in any way, shape, or form, right? So I'm just going to say that there's a lot of really positive things, obviously, and I actually still work in the medical field. However, there's a lot of very long-standing and old ways of thinking and being that are upheld in medicine as the standard and as what is to be expected of you. And so I've come to learn since my MRA experience that my guard went through medical school, like that part of me. So, which means I was very capable. My guard, the way that I sort of relate to my guard is that part of me is very efficient, hardworking, responsible, on top of it. Always looks like she's got it together. Always saying yes. Always doing a really great job, right? Always, doing her very best to make sure that everyone is happy at all times and that she continues to achieve. Like there's no end to that path. And so the truer, more authentic version of myself is a lot slower paced, does not go at that constant go, go, go sort of speed through life that is required or was required at that time. And has a different set of values and goals for her life than the ones that I was guiding my life by, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I was sort of going after these external goals. Like when you're in an academic medicine institution like that, you're supposed to want to do research and you're supposed to want to move up the chain in the university system, like get promoted and do all of these wonderful things that are wonderful. If that's what you truly want, they're wonderful. But what I came to realize and learn is that I never really wanted those things. And so it was incredibly isolating for one. And it was incredibly disappointing is the word that comes up, but it's not. I would achieve something and it just felt a little empty because it didn't actually mean something in the same way deep down that I thought it should or would, at the time. And in medicine, the other part of medicine that part of my work now is trying to open up some of these difficult conversations in medicine because we also don't talk about things. And this may be true of lots of other professions too, right?
I'm sure
this is my
many people can,
experience,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. Many
Totally.
people
Just
can
to
relate
say,
to,
totally.
yeah.
And so that idea of you just don't show weakness, right? You don't. And so, through this whole time when I was struggling, so when I started to feel burnt out as new staff on the wards and, being in charge of teams of, patients on the ward, so then you're leading a team with residents and students and being the top of that and feeling constantly like, am I smart enough? Should I even be here? Like that imposter syndrome kind of thing pops up and all of this, but you can never show it, right? And you can never talk about it because I must be the only one, right? Which is hilarious because obviously I was not. But at the time it felt like I was, right? And so I think what started to happen is as that disconnect kind of grew, once I started to realize it, right? It's like that whole idea of once you start to see it, it's really hard to unsee it. And so as I started to notice that more, I think that's when it just got harder and harder to shove down that little voice or that little message, whatever that was, of my intuition saying like, this isn't for you, like this isn't for us, whatever, right? Which was terrifying. And so that's why I think it took years from that realization to when I actually took some action.
The guard.
Hmm.
This is a persona that we talk a lot about in the Mind Rebel method in the academy. We all have these guards inside of us. And the guard is always trying to protect, prove. All the elements you named of your guard, I think, are so relatable to so many guards in the field that you're in, also in just corporate settings. These are the qualities that are celebrated, that are promoted, that do rise in the ranks of the universities and the research.
Absolutely.
And what I'm hearing you say, Kate, is that putting on this mask every day and going to work and being that version of you that was inauthentic to who you truly are, your body got louder, and louder and louder and louder, that this disconnect became no longer possible to ignore. Kate, was there a singular defining moment that kind of marked the change, or was it a series of moments?
It was more of a series of moments. I wish I could give you like a really exciting turning point. But as I was working in the community and starting to notice some of those same things happening again, I wish I could say I, woke up and changed my ways right away. I did not. Another really big life thing happened. My dad got diagnosed with ALS. This was in 2018. This was right around the time. And as I started to think about his future, and because, of course, being a physician, I knew where we were going. And I planned really early on to think I'm going to take some time off at some point in my dad's illness to help take care of him because it's really important for him to stay home. So sort of the first of the defining moments for me was I had a little bit of relief come up, a little sense when I decided and I said to my husband, at some point my dad's going to need help and I want to be there. That was 100% true. And it's also true that I had a small moment of like, okay, that's a reason to take a break again. Nobody will question that. Nobody will judge me. So as much as I 100% want, it's one of those cases where two things can be true. And that little voice, and that scared me, quite honestly. It made me think back to that voice that I heard, years ago, wanting, kind of hoping for that minor illness, right? Or that minor car crash. So it was that same thing where I thought, oh, okay. I didn't know what to do with that though. And so then I kept working. This was still, a period of time. And then it wasn't until after the pandemic started and I was still working and my dad's illness was progressing, I eventually ended up taking time off. And this is where the big turning point came. And this is where you came into my life, actually, rightfully so. And I happened to, so I was off helping my mom care for my dad. And so one day I was picking my kids up at school. So I was sitting in the parking lot at their school for another weird coincidence that I had met somebody that ended up having you on her podcast back then. And I heard this voice that spoke to me talking about coaching and actually talking about your experience, your story of having left your government position and struggling with all of those same questions that were, turning around in me of how do I walk away from a safe future that I've worked for? How do I give up security and do something different? And you did, right? There was just something about that conversation. I don't have no idea why I was listening to that podcast that day. I honestly don't. Like, it was a very strange coincidence that was obviously, I believe, meant to be, because I heard your voice and then it's like, well, later that night, I was like, well, I'll just look at the website. I'll look, I'd heard about coaching. I will say, I didn't really know what it was, but I'd heard a little bit about it, and something about it struck a chord with me even before hearing you. And then I heard you. I looked at the website. And the website just felt like a place I wanted to be. It still took me a little bit of time. Well, actually, no, I think I actually made the decision pretty quickly now that I think about it. I think I heard you in October, and then I went to one of your sessions in November, and then I started training in January. So it was pretty quick, actually. But the key part to that, though, is had I not been off of work to care for my dad, I never would have had, or I don't think I would have taken the time. I wouldn't have had the time and space to embark on something like coach training. Well, actually, when I signed up, I was just going to do part one. I was just going to learn about myself. And I think that that's what I needed in that moment. I finally had a moment. I had time. I had a little bit of space in my day. My dad's needs weren't enormous at that time yet. And I had time to do something like this. And so I did it. It was terrifying. I didn't tell anybody at first. You probably remember there was a whole thing about me like not knowing how to even say I was doing this type of work, which, says a lot too, but of where I was in that moment. But I started, and there was just like, wow. It was just this moment in doing part one. There was just so many moments of understanding of myself and of compassion finally, right? Like self-compassion, because I had been so ashamed of walking away from what I had perceived to be this like wonderful thing that so many people would be, but the ultimate, and that I should, right? Should was a very frequent word in my vocabulary. And I should have been so grateful for my life that outwardly looked amazing, right? I was so lucky. That is true. And yet inside, it didn't feel so lucky a lot of the time. And so one of the gifts that part one training did for me was allow me to understand my experience, right? In a way that it just resonated. Like, it just felt so true. And I was like, okay. And like, also like, man, why didn't I know this back then? It would have made that period of my life so much easier. But I don't know. I don't know how. Like, I firmly believe that everything that led me to the MRA was important, and I needed to experience all of that. I believe I was meant to do my training as a physician. Yeah, I believe all of the path, like I was on the right path. Now looking back, I was on the right path. It's just that the ultimate destination wasn't where I had
the picture
thought it was, right? Yeah. And that story that I had in my head of like, okay, you're going to be this, live this wonderful life in the academic, medical world, and it's going to be so wonderful. And no, that wasn't my stop. I had to keep on going to find where I was truly meant to be. And so, yeah.
It's really amazing. I mean, as I'm listening to you, Kate, it's really amazing that we all have these internal guidance systems inside of us. You've named it throughout this entire conversation, this small voice inside that was so easy to shush or so easy to push down. And these signals from our bodies that tell us when something is for us or not for us. Like, we're designed so wisely, and yet we complicate it so much with the shoulds, the opinions of others, the ways in which we've been conditioned. It's, hearing your story, Kate, I'm like, wow, yeah, the signs were there all along. And I can also put myself in your story because I know the excruciating process that you have to go through. You have to wrestle internally to finally trust what was already here. The voice, the feelings in your body, it can't be understated. Like that journey that you just took us through, like it just can't be understated. It's just such a courageous thing to do that very few people actually do in this lifetime.
It's interesting when you say courageous, right? Like if I was hearing this story about somebody else, I probably see that.
Right.
I see it as being just like, I almost didn't have another choice. Like it got to that point. But the other thing I wanted to bring up that, again, I think is very common in medicine, but probably everywhere else too, is that, by the end of medical training, you become so disconnected from your body, right? Because
Which is fascinating.
Right? Right? Because, right? Isn't it? It's like, let's learn all about the body, but actually nothing about the mind.
But let's completely disconnect from it.
Right? Totally. And so I was doing, years of calls and working, over 24 hours at a time. And, you eat really quickly or not at all. You don't pee, you're the last person on that list, right? You don't even recognize it for what it is, right? So I think that's why probably those early signs, that voice was probably there a lot earlier on in the story, right? I was so separated from being able to hear it, right? Or to feel it. So that has been a huge part of the work that I've done, and some of the most important lessons that I've learned since being part of the MRA is that establishing that connection again, right? That whole embodiment idea of like, okay, because man, that's where my wisdom is.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there all along, right? Like, of course it was. But it's only now, and in the last, really, it's less than 5 years, right? That I've been
Which is
in a
incredible,
place,
Kate,
which
to
is,
see
I know it
where
is
you are
weird.
today.
Yeah. So I think that was for me, like the most important part of this. Well, I don't know how to say the most important part of this, but a huge part of it was that establishing that connection again and realizing that, having the personas, I think that language for me of being able to say, okay, it helped me step outside of it to say, okay, there are different parts of me. They've played different roles. They've
And
all been
motivations.
important. And they've all
Yeah.
been important, right? Because I don't mean to say that my guard is my enemy, but no
Right.
means at all. Like I
She
admire
got
her.
you far.
Yes. And there's days where I'm like, I could use a little bit of you
Yeah.
today, right? But now I've come to realize, I think the actual wisdom lies in, how do I say this? At first, when I learned about the authentic self, I thought my goal was to try to be grounded and in touch with my authentic self, as much of the time as possible. Well, yes and no, right? Like, as we both know, because the real world. However, I've actually come to see it now as, no, my wisdom is in having my rebel mind, my guard, and my authentic self walking together in line. They all bring something different and equally as valid to my life and important, and they're all part of me. It's just, that discernment of who's driving the bus in any given moment, and just that awareness, just awareness
everything.
is just the key.
And it's so simple. It sounds so simple.
It's so simple.
But
it's so hard.
It is
Yeah.
so challenging. And once you,
Yeah.
you said something else about space, about actually having the space and giving yourself the space to do this work. I find that when I shouldn't speak on behalf of all humans, but I find for myself, when I'm in the hustle of life and just the chaos of life and in the rat race of life, taking time to feel my feelings and just creating space to do work on myself is just like, no one has time for that. And then once you do it, you're like, how does anyone not prioritize this over everything else? Because this is what changes the game. It literally changes the course, the trajectory of your life. Look at you, Kate. Look at where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And because we're in survival mode, most of us. And certainly through my sort of previous life, if we put it that way, I was living in survival mode.
Yeah.
I wasn't living my life. Like I was missing my life, essentially. I was there, but I wasn't there, And it is sort of that notion, that I've heard many places of, we're human beings, not human doings. And it's an important distinction. And I don't know, there was just so much of my identity was tied up into, being a physician, my productivity being tied to my worth. And I'm a caregiver by nature. I just am. So I've always been a caregiver by nature. And I think that's probably one of my greatest attributes, but also has been a big part of why I overgive and overdo. And it was part of the path to burnout because, as a physician, that role as a caregiver, as a physician, I wanted to also take care of the residents and the students that I was working with. I wanted to make sure, became a mother during that phase of my life. So I had 2 little kids during that time. So I was trying to, also excel and succeed in all of these roles all at once. And then I became a caregiver along with my mom, taking care of my dad, And what I didn't know enough about early on was the incredible toll that caregiving can take on you if you're not aware. So that awareness piece again, if you're not checking in with yourself, if you're not putting boundaries in to be able to maintain your own well-being, mental and physical health, all of that I still continue to learn today. So the last piece, just to kind of get you to where I am today, kind of follows that same line of thinking, is that I ended up doing coach training, of course,
Yes.
when I did part 2.
You couldn't say no.
No, absolutely. By that point, I was all in. And so I did that. I finished the program in January 2023. And by that point, I was still, my dad's illness still ongoing and worsening. So I wasn't back to clinical work at that point. So I was able to put some of the time and energy that I still had into coaching practice. So I started coaching, I had my own business and started coaching women physicians who were experiencing burnout or other forms of distress. And the reason that I think my heart led me there was that, I had been there. I wanted to change the narrative. I wanted to talk about it. Because, every new client I had, it was some version of the story I just told you, of thinking they were alone, of thinking something was wrong with them, that they couldn't keep up, or that they didn't feel good and feel, wonderful in this life that they had worked so hard to achieve. It's not to say that all of them ended up moving out of medicine. Actually, none of them that I worked with did. Like, that's certainly not my goal. But what I think was important was that I was able to hold space for them so they had that time and space to look inward. We talked about things like when you have to pee, those basic human functions, and going back, like, yes, you're a physician or you're a mother or you're all these other things, but you're a human being first. And what does that human being need to be able to do the rest of it? And these basic things were life-changing for many of the people that I worked with. And so that work was incredible and amazing. And I was very lucky. I had some really good opportunities to work with groups and work with some national organizations in Canada and some really wonderful groups of physicians, mostly women, but also some of the groups had a few men in them as well. And it was wonderful. What happened, again, another lesson about myself, was that I learned that the energy it takes me to put myself into a position to promote myself and to promote my services, the business side of coaching. Thank you for putting that into much better words. That, the interesting thing is that I really liked that, a part of it, but it took so much out of me that I started to sort of wonder, okay, is this something that's sustainable for me? But then once again, because I really believe that the life has plans for us, my dad ended up passing away August of 2023 after I had been working in my business for a little while. And then I was just starting to think about, okay, should I go back to clinical practice? Should I go back to, the patients that I, did love and miss in many cases? Because then I could sort of balance my coaching business and not have to worry about it from a financial standpoint being the primary, source of my income. And I was really close. I was right about to return to practice part-time when this other opportunity presented itself at like exactly the right moment. And so the work that I do now is with a national organization that works with physicians, where I'm able to do peer support and coaching, work with physicians that are going through difficult experiences for different reasons. And I have stepped into a job where, like, for the first time in my life, where I can say, like, wow, this is exactly where I'm meant to be. I joke with people that, like, my dad, like, created the job for me because I have a pension, like benefits and things
Yes.
like that, that were, safe from my dad's, point of view. But I have landed, the reason I say this is that I've landed in this spot that I didn't even know existed, in this job that I never would have expected was even possible for me. And it makes so much sense somehow. But now, again, looking back, like retrospect, you can look back with a different viewpoint, but I can see how everything I did was necessary to get me here. So, yeah, almost a year and a half, almost 2 years into it, and I'm still just so excited that I somehow landed here.
Yeah. It's amazing what happens when you let that little voice lead the way. When we talk about leading yourself well and this idea of inner leadership, it's allowing that voice to guide your next steps, step by step by step. One thing we talk a lot about in the Mind Rebel method is that when we are living and leading our lives from that seat of our most authentic selves and letting that part of us lead the way, that part of us knows something that the rest of us doesn't, the other parts of us don't know yet. And so it takes, again, I'm coming back to this word courage. It takes an enormous amount of courage to let that part lead the way. And the other thing is that, on this path of living a truly authentic life, we only really have 1 to 3 steps ahead of us at a time. We can sense where we're going. We can vision about where we're going. We can imagine where we're going. But the path to get there, I believe, truly is only revealed a couple steps at a time. As I track your story, as you share it with me here, I can see that in action, that you, Kate, and again, this is why I think you're such an extraordinary woman, is that step by step by step, you follow that inner voice, that inner leader inside. And the outcome is very different than perhaps how you imagined it when you graduated from coach training or before you started coach training. And yet life had plans for you that you were able to respond to and tap into by simply focusing on those next best steps right in front of you. And there's a part of you that knows the way and that guides those steps. And you're just such an example of what is possible and what can be made possible. Whole jobs can be made possible to your liking, with a pension, with benefits, with security. It doesn't have to be the wild world of entrepreneurship. And I think your story is so inspiring.
Thank you for saying that. I do want to point out that, it's still an everyday practice of self-awareness. And I will say that, going into this new job when I first started it, man, that guard was ready. She was like, yes,
here I'm back.
I'm back. I've been waiting for this. Right. And so I felt like that pull, right? And I felt that whole, like you've said, I think before, I've heard you say these words, right? Like the path of least resistance is not always the easiest path is not always the one.
No.
And so it would have been very easy to be like, yes, I am going to be here and I'm going to focus on all the things and in impressing people. And I still feel it. Like I feel it every day. And so it's like, those old patterns and those old, like
they don't die hard.
That's it. And there's limiting beliefs there that still come to the surface. And is the work I'm doing important? Are my ideas good enough? And I'm a quiet type of presence. And there's lots of people that I work with have different styles that share ideas more freely and more loudly than I do. And so I constantly still feel that kind of push-pull of like, okay. But I will say, the one thing that I have noticed, if I really think about it, is the times where I am more true to myself and am more in line with, the real, most authentic version of me, that's where the doors open. And that's where I feel the most comfortable. Like, I think that's where my power is and that's where my wisdom is. That's a more introverted, more quiet voice and more of a listener than a talker in many circumstances. but I found a place where that's okay. Most of the time. Like, I do have to push myself out of my comfort zone a lot and lean on those around me to also push me out of my comfort zone a little, but it's in a way that is sustainable. That's the key difference.
I really liked how you just named that. It's not that you have all these awarenesses and life becomes easy and, it's not that at all. Like you said earlier, how you've come to understand your authentic self. It's not that it's this idealized version of you that is living in the world and moving through the world with effortlessness and ease, and all these opportunities are flowing your way. You named it as, no, I walk every day with my guard on one side and my rebel mind on the other.
Yep.
And because you have such an intimate relationship with these parts of yourself and a frame to understand how your inner workings work, it is a daily practice of, who's driving the bus today? Understanding what it feels like in your body when the guard wants to step forward, because that can happen in an instant. That can happen in a millisecond. That can happen in a response to a conversation. It's
Absolutely.
so subtle. When these patterns are so deeply ingrained in our minds, it takes an enormous amount of awareness. And in order for awareness to occur, we have to create space for ourselves to take care of ourselves and to check in with ourselves and to be constantly monitoring is the wrong word, but checking in with the various parts of ourselves to see who is driving the bus. And when our rebel minds and our guards are activated and triggered and want to step forward, tending to them so that those aren't the parts leading the way, because we know what happens when the guard leads the way. We know how that story goes,
Yes, I've learned it a couple times.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that I also have come to recognize, because grief is a friend of mine now these days too.
Yeah.
That was another part of this whole thing. But I've even come to a place with that where it's like, rather than looking at the grief part of it as something that I have to get over or push past or that's going to be done, it's like, no, it's just part of me now. And so I don't know, it's like me and my whole team are walking around every day, right? But that's okay. Like, that's just life. And that's just, life's going to happen around all of these parts of me and for all of these parts of me. And that's okay.
And because you are so devoted to your inner world, that's the quiet energy that I was talking about at the very beginning of this episode. That's the quiet energy that exudes out of you without even trying. Like, that's the legacy. When we can be with ourselves in our grief, in our fears, in our guard's desire to protect, in our rebel mind's deepest, darkest fears, when we can be with ourselves, it expands our capacity to be with others in the same way. And that doesn't even mean it's in the words we say to others. It's literally in our presence. It's felt before words even come out of our mouths. And so that is a living legacy. That's what I mean.
Yeah. That just feels so true. And it's so in line with, like, the greatest gift that I think I can give to other people. And I do this every day in my work and with people at work, is the holding space part of it. Just the silent presence, just being there, allowing another human being to be heard and seen. What a privilege to do that in my work. Like, I do that every day in some capacity, more or less, at work. And then I strive to do that in my life as well. But, like, what an absolute privilege. It just absolutely is. And I think that is my legacy. If I can be witness to other human beings and whatever it is that they're going through at any given time, and if my presence can ease that suffering in some way, what else would I want to do?
That is a life well lived.
Right? I know. I'm so lucky.
Mm-hmm. Kate, if someone's listening to this and really resonating with where you were, with the shush shush, or the bodies getting, screaming in louder and louder and louder ways, and also understanding that someone listening to this might be listening, but I mean, you named it, even thinking about the question, it was terrifying to you because your capacity was so thin at that time. What words of wisdom would you want to share with that person?
So much. But I think it comes down to, first of all, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. If you're listening to this conversation, it's because you're meant to.
Yeah, it came to you.
And if it came to you, and if it strikes something inside, like, man, I've been there. And so just believe yourself, believe that that is something worth exploring with yourself when you're able. And it doesn't have to be a huge step or a huge leap. It could be, what could I do today to give myself 5 minutes of space, 5 minutes of joy, some little step, 5 minutes of compassion and understanding for what I need in that moment. And the body, I keep coming back to the body, like basic practices to listen to your body again, like nourishing it, eating when you're hungry.
I'm hungry. Oh, what do I
Drinking,
feel like?
right?
What do I want to feed myself?
Right? Like I talk a lot in my work too about, the 5 pillars like human beings we need, food, so nourishment, we need sleep, we need to move our bodies in whatever way is gentle and feels good to us. We need connection with other people and with ourselves, and we need time outside in nature. And what is one thing out of that list that I could do for myself today? And if you do that a few times, I believe that starts to create some trust again. So your body's going to start giving you more of these signals once you show that you're listening.
Yeah. Kate, before we wrap up our conversation, is there anything else that wants to be said?
I think if there's one thing that I could leave everyone with today, is just to listen to that quiet voice inside of them. Whatever it's saying, it's okay to want something different. It's okay to want something that you think is not in line with what you should do or what the world or those around you are telling you should do. Trust that voice. I'm here to tell you that voice is usually right. Just take the next step that brings you closer to who you really are.
That voice inside that you have learned to trust so much, Kate, that has led you here on a very, very long journey. When you look back at this entire journey, when that little voice first started to appear to where you stand today, what's clearer to you now?
I think what's really clear and what feels really true to me from where I stand now is that my place in the medical field or system is in supporting other physicians in doing their work. And what I mean by that is that, I loved many aspects of my clinical work before. I was a pediatrician. I got to talk to kids every day, hold babies, talk to teenagers, like connect with families. Like I loved so much of that. And it never felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. But I needed all of those experiences. I needed all of that to get to where I am now. And I see my role. It sort of feels like, of course, this is where you're supposed to be now. Because every day I get to hold the space and care for physicians who are out there doing their work. And it's almost like I sort of see myself, I have a picture of a lighthouse in front of me, because I sort of see myself, I'm sort of that lighthouse that's shining out and guiding in some way those around me. And I feel like my ripple effect or my impact on healthcare in Canada is even far greater than it ever could have been in my one office, if you know what I mean.
You talked about the fear that would surface in the early days of when the voice would creep up, and the fear of, oh, what does this even mean? You just went through how many years of school, you got to the apex of career, truly, this is like the apex of it all. And like, what this voice, this feeling, this is not for me. You described how even listening to that voice was just too much, too terrifying. And now fast forward, however many years later, and here you are in the same field, supporting the doctors, the physicians who are out healing others. Like, what perfection in it all, and the part of you that was so terrified in the past.
Yeah.
When we get a chance to zoom out and look at all the events and also look at the fears that prevented us from listening to that voice inside, and then seeing how when you listen to that voice, where it leads you and where it's leaded you in your life, it's just amazing to look back on.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense from this other end.
Right.
Of course. And it's
hindsight is 2020.
And I wouldn't change any of it at this point either, because I needed to experience that training. I needed to experience burnout. I needed to experience working as a pediatrician and all the wonderful experiences I had and moments of like just joy and like love for my patients and the families I worked with. And all of that got me to where I am now, where
if you didn't have those experiences,
I wouldn't be able to support others in the way that I can. I think it gives credibility and authenticity. I think that they can feel it, that I understand them in a way that maybe some other people wouldn't. It all makes sense. Again, like I honestly believe I'm where I'm meant to be.
Kate, I want to thank you so much for being part of this episode, for sharing your story so openly and so vulnerably, and for being such an inspiration to me and to the MRA community and to our listeners.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you for listening to Legacy Lived on the Mind Rebel podcast. If this episode invited reflection on the legacy you're living, you can explore our work at www.themindrebel.com.